Live. Hi everyone. Thanks for being early and on time. Welcome to Quick Connect Live. Quick Connect Live is a collaboration between Ethan, Jeffeth, and myself. So Ethan keeps changing his brand, so we'll
Just my name is okay. It's all right.
So welcome. Today's session. So every Quick Connect Live session, we have a topic that we talk about and we dive in. And lately we're experimenting with Miro to capture notes and also get participation. So that's what we'll do. So for today's session, I will be kind of your host. Jeffeth will be taking us through the topic mainly, and Ethan would be our Miro hero, our Miro
scribe.
Scribe, sure. Okay, so before we start, today's topic is about bringing the best out of you, right? So before we start, maybe what we can do is just do a quick introduction of yourself and just mention one thing or one condition that helps you perform at your best. Right? We're talking about bringing the best out of us, right? So I think let's just do that. How about let's start with Daniel.
I'm you first. What brings out my best? The ability to learn or learning something new.
Learning something new. Okay, quick introduction of yourself as well.
Been in corporate world for the last 30 years. And then recently came out to be on my own business. So yeah.
Definitely lots to learn there.
For me, lots to learn for me. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Pick the next person.
Yeah, pick the next person.
Oh, me pick ah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ken.
So what's the question again? Just to
introduce yourself and what is one thing or one aspect that helps bring the best out of you.
Right. So I'm currently working with Ethan on the Center for Cybersecurity. I came from that field. And I think the best, I bring out the best out of it is when I can actually assess the entire situation and have all the possibilities mapped out.
Assess the situation and all the possibilities mapped out. Okay, beautiful. Sounds like analytical strategy.
That sounds very strategic, which is why he enjoys working with me.
Okay, cool. Ken, pick the next person.
Zijun then.
Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Zijun. Yeah, I work in PCA, manpower planning. Basically, I help to bring in foreign workers. So what helps me do my best is to clarify my responsibility with the person. So to ask the person, so what exactly do you want me to do? Because when I have more clarity, then I would better know what to do and plan. Yeah.
Clarity of task. Awesome. Zijun, pick the next person.
Faith.
You're muted, Faith.
Okay, the space bar then will work. Okay, anyway, I'm Faith and I was a network engineer for 10 years before I moved on to product owner. What helps me to perform the best? It would really be I'm interested in the task that I'm being tasked to do. Otherwise, it's very hard for me to do it with joy and try to fulfill every single part of it.
Okay, nice.
Boo Boo, next.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Bulbul and I have 11 plus years experience in R&D and then I have 1 year's experience in supply chain. Currently I'm working in HP and the one thing that maximize my productivity or brings best from me is that identifying people's talent and connect with people that I think is take out best from my side. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bubble. Pick the next person.
Japet.
Okay, I'm Jeffert. I am currently a L&D specialist in the civil service. One things that bring the best out of me is having conversation with Ethan and Alex. I think it stimulates my intellection, which is part of my top 5, you see. So I just get excited.
Plus your input and your learner at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So today they asked me to output from my input.
Input loves to output as well, right? That's part of the process.
Because input, there's also never mind.
Output. Okay, I'll pick Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm from a legal background, and I think what brings out the best in me would be positive pressure, like when I have to present something within a short period of time.
Thanks, Melissa. Have you done your Clifton Strengths assessment? Do you know your top 5?
Yeah.
Okay, she's frozen a little bit. Okay. Hey, Melissa, I think your connection's a little bit poor. I'm not sure she's getting. Okay. Sorry, Melissa. Your network's a bit poor. We can't hear you. So maybe you can use the chat and tell us.
Yeah, right. I think if she off her video, it would be better. Just the audio, maybe.
Yeah.
I have to look it up.
Oops. Okay, no problem. Okay, let's move on. We are left with Sher and Joanna. Maybe Sher, you can go first.
Good morning. I'm Cher Anderson. I am in the States. I have predominantly been in a corporate world in leadership development and currently in talent solutions. And what gets the best of me is when there's crystal clear communications, but done in a positive light. So positivity is definitely at the top for me.
Awesome. So when things are positive, then have a positive environment.
Yes.
Awesome. Joanna said that she can chat, so she will type. So Joanna's intro, she just started doing L&D in NCS. And what brings the best in her is a good vision and a plan to get there. That would help me too. So I've not gone yet. Ethan, do you want to go first?
Well, okay, I'll go first. Hi, I'm Ethan. Okay, well, I'm the guy, I'm the person who's always looking at the big picture. So it happens to be right now, look at the big picture of cybersecurity ecosystem in Singapore. And I'm doing the training aspects, but I'm also touching on the awareness aspects in the industry. So that's what we're focusing on right now. Where I do my best work is whenever, now I wanted to say when I have control over the situation, but like because when I can steer the ship, but I think it's more likely it's like there is a meaningful outcome that we're all gunning for and that people can agree upon. I think these are the things that we're looking for the most for me. The ones we have that is very easy for me to work.
Right. Awesome. So finally, my name is Alex. I run Strengths Alchemy. For my day job, I actually work with a real estate firm and I do what people call workplace experience. So it's basically designing the office to enhance the experience of the employees, right? And I work with my client for that, doing human-centered design or design thinking as part of that role. So what brings the best out of me is the opportunity to ideate, so to come up with new things, structure them, experiment with things, and collaborate with people. So that's really gets me excited, right? So it's like how we did Miro together to kind of reinvent Quick Connect Live and things like that. So that really is very interesting for me. Right. So for today's topic, we're going to talk about it bringing the best out of you or best out of us, and bringing more out of you. Sorry, bringing more out of you. Right?
The best, more. Wait. What?
The more and best out of you.
Okay, so wait. I need to change the mirror. So wow.
Okay, so I will pass the time over to Jeffers. I think Jeffers has some slides and information that he'll take us through first.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So today's, before I start, just want to caveat, today's sharing is more of a conversation because we are all expert in our own right and bring the best out of us. So no one holds all the answer. So what I'll just share is a particular framework which I find that was useful for me and just part of some of the observations that I've seen while coaching other people around that particular framework. So when we say about bring more out of you, actually what we're referring to is performance, right? Whenever in different areas, different tasks, and different things that we do, we sometimes perform well, or sometimes we perform poorly. And today's conversation is really just to explore around what makes up performance, what makes up good performance, what makes up poor performance, and what are some of these elements that contributes to it. Okay, so I will just share a bit of slide and some short activities just for us to brainstorm, and later on we'll invite everyone just to have a conversation around it. Okay, so give me a moment as I share my screen. Okay, can anybody see my slide? Okay, thanks, Daniel.
Halfway.
But it's not full screen.
Yeah,
About the
it's-
word performance, I can only see performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to reshare again. Try.
Okay, let me try again now.
Great.
Okay, go now.
Yep, that's good.
Okay, so I just want to share a bit of a traditional history about performance, right? I mean, talking about the old school methods, how we were brought up when we like to perform different tasks, right? When we were young, we went out to do different things. Whether is it public speaking, whether is it playing the violin, or whether is it even like doing Miro and setting up Miro. These are new tasks that we do. Traditionally, how we think about it is, oh, there's some sort of capacity or talent within people, right? So there's some people have certain aptitude to do certain type of activities, so they do it better over time. And traditionally, it was always thought that, in order for that capacity to come through, you need to have more knowledge, right? So that's how we were educated from young. We just get schooled, whether is it the right way or wrong way. Sometimes we just get schooled either way. And of course, for some particular areas, we spend more time and effort, we become better at it. For some areas, we give up because either somebody told us we're not good enough, then that never allowed the capacity or their potential to come to fruition. So that was the traditional way of thinking. And then in the 1970s, I think there was a guy called Timothy W. Galloway. So he's the guy who wrote The Inner Game of Tennis. So he started coaching a lot on sports coaching. And he came up with another model which I would say more accurately describe what performance is about. Let me see. So he started to coin the idea around performance equals to potential minus interference. Now, most of you would have heard about familiar about potential, right? Potential are things that we are good at, the talents that we have that came from strengths. But more often than not, we are unaware about the interference. So Timothy Galloway was one of the person who started to, when you look at the sports performance coaching, right? Back then, people were focusing on changing behaviors. It was the external game. So anything that you did, like, oh, that was a poor swing, so I correct your behavior and to swing it in a more accurate or more precise manner. And what he realized that many of the poor performance issue from tennis players, he found out that actually a lot of them happen within the inner game. He called it the inner game. So the inner game is actually not happening outside in terms of your behaviors, but it's happening inside your mind. What the inner dialogue you have with yourself, what do you say to yourself? So if you tend to be have a lot of self-critic around yourself, have a lot of self-doubt around yourself, that tends to affect your game. And therefore, that's how he started off this whole inner game and have since coached in other areas around sports coaching. And this particular framework has since expanded to the areas of coaching. So I think some of you who do coaching would have been familiar with this model as well, where usually when we coach other people, we bring the best out of other people, right? We ask people's strength, but more often than not, we tend not to focus on interference. But I think a couple of weeks ago, Ethan covered a bit about shadows, right? So shadow is a form of interference. So later on, I'll cover a little bit more in depth. Now, before I move deeper into this particular model in which what's helpful for me and what might be helpful for you, I have just two questions just for you to think about, right? And the first question is an individual reflection, okay? So this individual reflection is, I want you to think about a time when you perform a task poorly. You can choose any task that you, could be recent or some time ago, okay? And what I want you to do is when you're performing that task, what thoughts were going through your mind? And how did you feel about it as you were performing that task? Now, when you have the answer, what I like you to do is I like you to pen down your response on the chat box, right? In the chat box. So let's capture that and let's take a couple of moments. So Ethan put resentment. That's more of the feelings.
Yeah, the thoughts were around resentment. It's like why am I doing this?
So Daniel puts around self-critic. Okay, nice. Alex put, what's he going to say? Really don't want to talk to him. What's that feeling like, Alex?
Yeah, I think feeling is kind of hesitation and apprehension.
Okay, hesitation and apprehension.
Yeah.
Sure, distracted and then disappointment with frustration and self. Bubu, what is requirement and resource? Can you share a bit more?
So for me, I always think about the task, that what is the requirement and where I will get the resource to complete the task. So when I poorly performed, it came to me that maybe I didn't understand the requirement properly to fulfill the task. And then also I struggle to find out the resources that is needed to complete the task.
Okay.
So that is self-doubt is actually came first in my mind, that did I understand the requirement properly or not?
Yeah. So I'm hearing like you mentioned there's self-doubt involved. And
yeah, and I have enough knowledge to perform that or not. Second thought is that, which is resource.
Okay. Thanks, Bubu. Faith, okay, so critics seems to be a common response. And then a bit of frustration and anger.
Yes, so Faith's response is interesting, right? I think the response was, what were her thoughts after she has performed badly? So the question is kind of more of, at the point of time when you were going to perform it, the thoughts you have before and during, or are you asking about the thoughts that you have after?
So more during.
The question is about the during, like
during.
Before the results came out, how were you feeling and what were you thinking about? Yeah.
But normally I would be able to know that I have done something wrong as I'm going through the task also.
Okay, that's very good. Yeah. So as you think you're doing wrong and you're doing poorly, you will be criticizing yourself as and when you're doing, is it?
Correct.
Cool.
Right. Okay, so it's in the process criticizing.
In the process of criticizing as you're doing.
Correct.
Cool.
Nice. Joanna wrote that one, resentment and self-critic about what she did or didn't do, and she should feel angry or regretful.
Yeah.
For Ken, his thoughts were bored, same thing again. You're not going to get that with Ethan, don't worry. And he will feel the constant need to self-motivate and do short bursts to complete the work. Which is kind of a good self-regulation, right? So he's aware and then self-regulates.
But Ken, I'm curious about it. When you say the bored and you need to constantly motivate yourself, how does that relate to you performing poorly?
So basically, if it's like a task, even if I put that poorly at the start, I can auto, like, I will keep off as I go along the task, it will auto adjust myself, like keep adjusting, and then after that the task will turn out fine. But if I'm really bored with it, no matter how much I try to motivate myself, the task will just go to shit.
So you're meaning like when you're doing the task, you just have either thoughts around boredom or thoughts around this is not going to work out.
Yeah.
And
So
that
it's like,
has
okay,
to be poorly performed.
yeah. Like if it's like so boring, I'll just close my eyes and then sometimes the task won't even get done. But yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. So I point out some common feelings of frustration, apprehension, even anger, resentment that came about. So a lot of negative emotions. Okay, let's do a flip side to that, reflection too, right? So now I like you to think the opposite of it, right? So particular task that you perform really well. What were the thoughts that went through your mind and how did you feel about it? Alex, are you responding to the question or are you responding to Ken?
Responding to the question.
Alex finds Ken a very interesting specimen.
I thought you were excited and curious about Ken suddenly.
No, okay, so Ken talked about boring, right? Then immediately when I start talking about looking at his talent teams, I go like, okay, I know what makes him boring. If you start looking at things that in the past, things that are not big enough, that will not help people to remember him, things that doesn't position him as the first.
Everything that he's doing today at his other job.
Yeah, so anything, I just look at his top three, right? I can kind of guess what bores him and what excites him. So when
You
he
can
said
see my
boring,
response, you know, right?
and when the moment you said boring, I go like, okay, I kind of know what will excite you, right? So that's kind of like something that's very, very useful to explore. And then to answer the question, right? For me, the thoughts that goes through my head when I'm performing a big task is like, well, this is interesting, right? And then I will feel excited and curious.
Excited and curious, interesting thoughts. Quick question, were you focusing on yourself or focusing on the task?
More on the task.
More on the task, right? Okay, interesting. I saw Che put energized, positive, and fun. So there's a feeling, similar fun and energized feeling. But Che, what were some of the thoughts that went through your head as you were feeling energized, positive, and fun?
Trying to think. I don't honestly remember what was going through my head. I just remember thinking, all right, this is like I don't remember all the thoughts that were going through my head other than what's the next thing? Let's do this next thing.
Yeah. So it's more knowing what steps to take next and it comes naturally.
Yes.
Thanks. Facebook, I'm good at this. I can do it without problem. Proud of the work to run, motivated to do again. Thoughts, everything click. Daniel put, Ethan, it will happen as long as I want the outcome. Can you share more about that, Ethan?
Yeah, so it's about motivation. It's like if I see a point in going into this, it will definitely happen eventually. Like, I realized that whenever I don't do something well, let's go back to this, right? Like it's always where I'm doing it because I have to. And then when I get to a point where I am at peace with the kind of consequences or outcome I see at the end of this, I will be able to perform it well. Does it make sense?
So you are able to visualize the outcome.
Yes.
And it's quite clear to you inside your head lah. But the steps may not form yet, but you naturally know what steps to take.
And I actually want it. Like very often, like the biggest problem is that I can predict a lot of outcomes that I don't want, but I still have to do it because I'm doing it for other people.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I think that is interesting because now you talk a bit about motivation as well coming into the picture. We'll explore a bit about that later and see how it comes up. So very interesting thoughts and comparison just before reflection 1 and reflection 2, right? So on reflection 1, it was a bit more of some of these negative emotions that pop up. So it wasn't a very pleasant experience. On reflection 2, of course, then there's a bit more positive emotions attached to it. People, you generally want to do more of it. probably the time where people tell you about good things, give you positive feedback, you tend to do more. Then you tend to get better at it as anyway. Okay, so I'm going to just move on to the next slide just to explore deeper into the performance formula. But let's first explore a bit about what is potential, right? And I really want to talk about this because for the couple of months that we have talked around strength, talents, is another way to put it under potential. But first thing first, right? What is potential, right? So it starts off with also your capabilities, right? And to be honest, it's like if you have never played tennis, thinking about tennis won't make you good, right? So you do need to actualize your potential by doing that particular task. That's where you start to build knowledge, skills, and abilities, whether is it in your area of work or whether is it something that you enjoy. Now, chances are things that we enjoy more, we tend to build more capabilities around that because we spend more time and effort to do it. We tend to get more feedback around that area, and naturally, we tend to get better at it. On the flip side, when you're much younger, if people don't tell you about you can't draw art, you are not a great artist, you get D grades for all the art pieces that you draw, there's a part of you that may stop drawing, and you may tell yourself, oh, because I'm not good at it, so I shouldn't develop it. And when you don't develop it, you just don't get better at it. So in a way, you should stop yourself short of gaining the capabilities that you could have done, right? Now, the second part of it is strength and yeah. Alex?
So it sounds like what you just said is that the person's potential is also limited by their beliefs or their self-image, right?
Yes.
In addition to capability, strengths, talents, bandwidth, there's also the belief and self-image part that probably fits into this.
And
Yes.
I would like to add in later on, but with I think after Jeffert has covered a bit more, some of the studies that were done about this regarding Asians and mathematics in America.
Yeah, so maybe later on we can share a couple of examples as well. So one particular example is like public speaking, right, was one of my greatest fears for some time. But eventually I joined Toastmasters, right? I'm still fearful of it now if you ask me to do public speaking. But because I participate enough, I get good enough. Doesn't mean I prefer to do it, but I get good enough to have the capability to, I know some people call it smoke something, or to be able to deliver something quite decent. Maybe not championship standard, but because I did invest the time and effort to do it, naturally the capabilities actualize some of my potential. Right, so you don't have to feel great about it. You don't have to prefer it, but as long as you do it, you have that competence, it will actualize some of the potential as well. Now, strengths and talents. This one, Alex, you want to add in? No. Yeah.
So it's interesting, right? When we talk about talents, and I'm going to bring in the Clifton strengths language, right? So we define talents as a natural recurring pattern of thinking, feeling, or behaving that can be productively applied. So talents, by definition, then actually aligns itself pretty well with potential, right? So you might not have gotten there yet, but you have the potential to get there. Strengths then is defined as a consistent near perfect performance at a particular task. So personally, I would have actually shifted strength to the performance side of things rather than the potential side of things. And for strengths, we always talk about strengths having the necessary skills and knowledge and practice, right, combined with talents that makes it a strength, right? So it's about the ability to deliver and to perform, right, basically, in whatever task that we are looking at.
Yeah, and I also want to add that because one of the key tenets of talents is it comes as either you were born with it plus the lifestyle or that you acquired, right? So you develop certain that means and tendencies, right? I would say that you can tend to perform and you can develop that as a strength.
Right. So I think there are different literature about it, right? We talk about how the talents come about, and some people ask, is it nature or nurture?
Nurture, yeah.
And I think the short answer is both, right? So if you even if you have twins, right? So if you talk about nature part and you have twins, you will recognize that they could turn out very, very different. And we've seen twins with very different personalities and characteristics. At the same time, when we talk about talents as a natural pattern, and maybe Ethan can add a bit about that, we talk about development neurologically, right? So as children, when we're younger, we have all these neural networks that, that fires off all over the place. And as we grow and develop, some of these neural networks actually become thicker, right? Where myelin actually grows around it. And what happens is that becomes a certain pattern. When something triggers, there's a certain pattern of neurons get triggered in our brains that triggers a kind of a thought, a feeling, or behavior. And that neural network in our head tends to settle in a little bit more once you reach the age of 18, 21-ish, right? And that kind of settles in. So people ask again, well, if it's kind of nature, nurture, can it change? So there is this thing that people call the neuroplasticity of the brain, which means that yes, you can potentially change it, but it takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort for you to be able to rewire your neurological networks, right? Your brain, essentially. So again, even in our Clifton Strengths reports, we see that if someone goes through kind of like a life-changing event, sometimes like near death, for example, right, that causes a person to re-evaluate everything, it can cause certain personality changes and your talent teams could shift. So that's the nature nurture thing about talents, of how it kind of settles around the age of 18, 21 and still has the potential to change if there's enough cause, right? Enough energy that causes that rewiring.
So I mean, I will just talk a little bit about the mechanisms, because a lot of the mechanisms we were just talking about were actually hypothetical concepts given by pseudo-neurologists who talk about it. I'm not saying that you're wrong. It's just that a lot of this in the 80s and 90s, they actually don't know anything about the neurology of how the brain works. But they started having this hypothesis and it became the commonplace. In fact, it's not about myelin sheaths. It's not about all these kind of things, because it's actually about glial cells. And that's a very long story on its own. And it's about how your patterns and everything is done. We're talking about the folds of the brain of a person like Einstein versus a normal person. Still, again, very hypothetical, very ish. So outliers also is a little bit off. There were a number of neuroscientists who were saying not exactly true. What the 10,000 hours fixes a pattern. It doesn't mean you'll get good at it. It means you will do that same thing over and over again. The practice makes permanence, not perfect. And this is where the other part of this goes into the picture. So there is the concept of generational traumas. There's a concept of shadow selves and all these kind of different things. Why is it that through a near-death experience, somebody might change if you bring in the concept of shadow self? And I'm just going to bring this in only because it's also part of the fun. It's because you're forced to face certain shadows of yourself that you're finally letting go. A lot of us use our shadows as weapons. A person who makes money would use his ability to make money or con people out of money as his, which is his shadow self, as a thing that he's proud of. And then he experiences something life-changing and he starts changing his talents and his abilities because he was forced to face his shadow. And this is where then it illuminates, it changes the way he looks at the world and all these kind of things. So there's multiple ways we can look at this. There are certain things where you have lesions in your brain and it will create a certain outcome as well. But those also relate back to your emotional regulation, whether you get triggered in a certain manners, whether you actually understand a certain type of speech, how you listen to music and sounds changes, and therefore the different triggers come along. These are like the things where it becomes interesting. My favorite story about this is where somebody actually had his amygdala removed. And he is, Zijun, there are plenty of people out there in the world who have done 10,000 hours and do worse than when they did it for 1 hour. So it is absolutely true that there is a lot of different things. So deliberate practice, yes, that the link that's given by Daniel is exactly it. Deliberate thought practice is what makes a great violinist. I mean, this is specific to violin. There's a lot of examples around this. But when we go back to this, right, like the process is very clear about this nature versus nurture concept, because like Jefferson was saying, right? Like depending on how your parents treat you and people validate you, right? Then you will get good at something because you're good at it. Two twins would have completely different results depending on the environment they're brought up in. I mean, this is also one of the things that it's important that we recognize that like all this might differ.
Yeah.
But at the extreme end of the spectrum, you're talking about hyper performers. The nature comes in as a big part of this because if you have longer limbs, you're going to climb trees better than the next person. But you can still be an amazing climber, but not the top climber. So this is where, like when we talk about inner game and all these kind of different things, there are certain elements where depending on you're talking about extreme end, you're talking about good performers or just the best version of yourself. Because this is where the picture comes in. Yeah, Jeffrey.
Yeah, so I'll just add on to Ethan's point okay, so two parts, right? One is on the capabilities, right? And really it is talking about like if we try something new, and at first time we suck at it, it's really because we just don't have the capability and we acquire capability over time, right? So it potentially needs to come through certain level of practice. For strength itself, yeah, I think there are certain predisposition where certain things you can develop to be something more consistently done well. And for some people, it may be just done well enough. You might not need Olympic standard, but you can just do well enough to get by. And that comes a lot from our later stages in life, right? When, I mean, the young age, we expose our kids to everything, but it's during the later stages where, I mean, even in a workplace, right? The older you get, the more clearer you need to know about where you can contribute most. And you need to rely back on your own area of strength in that sense, to know what you can do and what you can't do. So that forms, relating it back to potential, that's how I see the linkages.
Can I just add on to what Jeffrey just said, right? Like one of the major things about potential is that if you look at how education system works, it is incremental. So if your primary one experience is bad in math, primary 2, primary 3 was continue to get worse because you're lagging behind the class, and then you create a reinforcement, right? And then you might meet a really good primary at your primary 5, you might meet a really good math teacher that really fully inspires you, and then you double down on math. Suddenly you can be really good at it. It really depends. Like it's really where the capabilities come back into the picture of nurture is a large part of this, like the environment experience is a large part of this. But if you talk about extreme end, nature takes a large part of the tiny little parts of the Olympic level difference.
Yeah, and actually I want to add on to Ethan, right? Even in the strengths language, when we talk about why we focus on talent, is because we always see talent as a multiplier, right? So imagine someone who has the maybe piano, right? Someone who has great talent in playing the piano learns 1 hour versus me who have 0 talent in piano. I might practice 10 hours and not be as good as the person who has practiced 1 hour, right? So talent also becomes the multiplier. So that brings us back to the 10,000 hour rule, right? So not everyone who practices 10,000 hours will have the same outcome, also because that talent plays a factor to how well the person performs.
There's also privilege and the right access to the right knowledge and the access to all these different things, or to good pianos and all, like the list keeps going, right? And that becomes very complex. But I think if there's anything about today's topic, it's really about how can you bring out the best in yourself or more out of yourself, rather than an international standard that we're trying to compare ourselves to and try to fight with.
Yeah, so I think Ken raised a good point around in the chat, right? So parents' response was why other subjects didn't do well, so minimum effort since then. So that's the feedback he got. And so we also have to question ourselves whether us not getting good is a result of just not putting enough practice. Or maybe because you want to practice, then all the interference come in, which I'll talk about it later, how they will creep into affecting the overall performance. I just want to talk a bit about bandwidth. I added that in because bandwidth is a concept.
Sorry, David, I have a query regarding these talents, right?
Yeah.
So as per my understanding, that capability is something that we can build and grow over time, over practice. But talent is something I feel, also I believe that that you can nurture it. If you have the talent, you nurture it, and you can actually bring your potential to a maximum level. But if I don't have talent in something, I actually cannot develop my talent at a maximum, because when we are talking about maximum performance and maximum potential, I might have a talent, but it's not a maximum level, and I have a limit to take it to the maximum level. So is that a contributor to the capabilities? Because for me, if you have capabilities, you can build up over time, over practice, over everything. But talent is something that is you do best. So if you don't have that, so let's say if I don't have singing talent, doesn't matter how much I practice, I cannot develop a maximum potential on my singing capability. I can develop this at a limit.
Yes.
So for me, strength is little bit different than talent for me, because strength, I think we all individual have different strength, and it's not related to talent, but talent is something that is already within you, or you can do best. That is my understanding.
Okay. So Alex, you want to clarify about the Clifton strengths talent? So I'm referring more to so in Clifton strengths, the talent is it's a bit like a moving goalpost, right? The talent shows you that you can reach up to maybe 200% of that potential. Then of course I put in the capabilities and effort to hone up that talent, and it became my strength, and I can leverage on it. Whereas in the case whereby maybe after 18 years old, let's say the talent is a bit, you're moving goalposts back to only develop up to 80%. I can still develop up to a decent standard with enough practice. But whether or not I can push up to 200%, maybe not. I mean, also put in the case whereby longer limbs, right? You tend to be able to do certain things better. Maybe like swimmer, also what do you call that? I know, Ethan, what do you call that? Swimmer, you have certain type of body shape.
Swimmer, the swimmer's body, basically.
Yeah, swimmer's body. Yeah. So those tend to increase the potential.
Okay.
But of course, without practice, you're still the same standard.
Yeah, so I will use Jeff's conversation point, right? Like there are people who are tone deaf and have helped them drastically improve after 6 months, even though they failed for it. Sorry, tone deaf. Sorry, my bad. I used the wrong term. I put deaf. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. One of the major things about this is that like I help these people actually be able to get past all these things that they thought they were not talented in. I think one of the major things about this is that's why we're talking about this today. That's why Jeff talks about interference. I work a lot on the shadow self and the interference aspects of things. And I think this is where I think Jeff will lead eventually too, because as you practice, if you believe you're tone deaf, no matter how good you are or how much you practice, you are always going to confirm that you're tone deaf and going to continue down that path. Yeah. And that's exactly where the interference comes in. So for example, Bulbul, you showed exactly how a lot of our societal expectations of what talent means, which is natural and something you cannot train. I actually would like to call absolute bullshit on that belief system, only on the grounds of I've seen it drastically change for people once you remove interference. And I think this is where Jeff will be sharing a lot about afterwards.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and the other thing that you probably want to think about in terms of talents is the way you see it, right? So yes. I'm just going to talk about maybe something as basic as moving around. Right, so we talk about someone who can see. It's relatively easy. The talent person can move from one side of the room to the other. What if the person was blind? You then say the person is not talented to, I mean, I'm just using an extreme example, right? But a person who is blind might be able to use something called echolocation to identify space and move around. So I think a lot of times we don't recognize that there's a lot of potential in other aspects. So in Clifton strengths, right, we always say, and this is something I mentioned in one of my interviews, we can often do what we think we couldn't do, just not in the way we thought we had to do it. So in Clifton strengths, we don't tell people what they can or cannot do, just what's the best route for them. And that's what I love about Clifton strengths so much, right? So I suspect also for Ethan, when you were able to help someone tone deaf to be able to play music well, you were tapping on to something different for this person, right?
Yes. So they would always go, I can't hear the sound, but that's also because I started recognizing that they were actually listening to their own instrument. They were having a sound in their head that they were listening to. So that's when I started, so that's what we term as interference, right? Like you're imagining rather than being present with your sound.
Right.
And then when they heard their sound, suddenly they go, ho, and then that's when it starts changing.
Yeah. And I'll cover a bit about interference. This is an interesting topic because that should be the bulk of the conversation. Interference is often not talked about, but maybe let me cover bandwidth first, right? So I say bandwidth, right? Not the internet bandwidth, but this is an important concept. It's often misunderstood, but it's really fundamentally what it talks about is if you imagine that there are some days where you wake up, even it's a shitty day, even if the day went really bad, you realize you still have the capacity to handle it. But there are really days whereby just some little trigger can set you off, and you just went out of control. Now, so I thought about this bandwidth because it was first identified around leadership potential, right? And one of the conversations I have recently within my within the group leaders that work with the directors, they were mentioning that, yeah, so some of them have the bandwidth shift over the days. So on certain times in the morning, they feel that they can handle a lot more. And sometimes when it reaches up to a particular time, they need to step away and walk away when they meet the problem. Right, so bandwidth, it's that capacity where sometimes you feel you can handle more, even though you have a lot of things that is on your plate at the moment.
And you're talking about mental bandwidth, right? It's about amount of space you have available, your emotional capacity. Again, right? Like when we go back to this,
call it headspace as well.
Poverty is one of the biggest suckers of bandwidth.
Yeah,
and this is something that I think it's relevant in that sense, and I love it that you're talking about this, so I'm just echoing it.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Some people call it capacity. Some people call it headspace. Like you might hear some people say, "I just don't have any mind space now." That means basically the person is telling you, "I have no bandwidth to take on now." But then there are some days when you sleep over it, the next day you have that headspace to deal with it. But what I really want to point out too is changes during the day. It is not realistic to say that I have all the headspace throughout the day. We are human beings lah. There are some time where we suddenly get mood swings, right? So our bandwidth is really like a moving goalpost that changes over time lah. But of course, as we become more competent, that mental headspace deal with things differently lah. Okay.
Hey, so Jeffrey, I thought it's interesting. I know the title of the book was The Inner Game, right? But as Ethan has pointed out, potential can also oftentimes be related to things like external resources, right? Like how good a mentor you have, the privileges that people with more resources or money have, access to better equipment and stuff like that. Where does that play in this?
So I think the external resources and mentors bring about the potential. It's a bit, but it's a bit like if you attend a course, it brings about the capability. You learn a new capability, then it brings about the potential. But without the mentors to guide, then of course, then the potential remains hidden lah, or it's not visible, or it doesn't get. I don't want to say the word unleashed, but that's the only word that comes to my mind, right? It doesn't get brought out, right? So like what Ethan said, we have a lot of things that's happening around us. So some of them would either increase the potential in which we express it, some of which will then become our interference in life, which stops some of that potential from coming up.
Yeah, and I just wanted to talk about this part where there are a lot of people who say that bosses don't value them and and therefore they're not talented. But the thing is that they're not even communicating with the bosses, they're not even communicating with people. So again, right, this goes back into the bandwidth element where their thoughts are always about my boss doesn't think about me, my parents don't take pride in me, they don't say this about me. Those thoughts that are cycling in your head interferes with your bandwidth to focus on what's happening at hand.
Yeah. And this point is related to a point around, I mean, as we did the reflection 1 and 2 just now, I think some of you might be aware that when you are fully engaged on the task, right, your thoughts tend to be around the task itself. The steps tend to be naturally, it comes to you, right? So your bandwidth is filled with those thoughts. Whereas in the case whereby where you're performing poorly, there's a lot of thoughts that were more self-conscious. It's all about yourself, about self-doubts. Then your headspace is filled up with those thoughts. So that's how bandwidth would work, and that's how interference relates to bandwidth.
It sounds a lot like presence as well, right? How present you are.
Yes.
That's another long story, man.
Shall we move on to interference?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the best segue to the interference.
Okay, so you all have a lot more about interference, but I'll just share a couple of interference where I've spotted. And the number one interference to any performance, which I've identified a lot, and maybe some of you may relate to it, is self-consciousness, right? And Timothy Galloway talks about it into self one and self two, right? So self one is the inner critic, the one that is always frustrated about yourself, the one that is super analytical and is very self-critical, puts a lot of negative judgment on self. That comes forth with the ego self as well. Then the self two, he called it the inner self lah. So maybe Ethan have a different way of describing it, which is more your natural self, your childlike self, the self that likes to experiment, that's more intuitive about things, more present. Self one is more about past and future. Self two is more present. And one of the things that I observe is like when you're performing well, you tend to focus a lot more on experimenting. I know what's the next step that might work out, and I just do the task and see what happens. Whereas when people are performing poorly, they tend to look at being critical about themselves. Sometimes even doing the task, you already start to critique yourself. You tend to have self-doubt. Right, bye, Che, bye.
Hi, Che.
Yeah, so self-consciousness, negative self-doubt, negative self-talk tend to be one of the top interference that came about. Okay. Wait, let me see. Is Ethan away?
Yeah, he went.
Sorry, I just went to the toilet and I just came back just nice.
Oh, that's fast.
Yeah, there's it's called speed toileting. When you love the conversation, you have to come back fast, right?
Yeah, so we were just talking about self-consciousness, self one and self two, but that's how Timothy Galloway puts it. And this is also in relation to the shadow self, where, okay, so how I see it is the self one gets built up. That means I'll call it just habits, unhelpful habits, right? They get built up when we were young, and they take in the form of the ego self from our young experience and what we have experienced from people to give us feedback, right? And what we realize is that when you meet the shadow self, you tend to get triggered a lot. So self one shows up a lot in telling you things, blaming other people, feeling resentful about yourself. And self two tends to get hidden in that sense. So one of the ways to recognize interference is to start even paying attention to what kind of conversations you're having with yourself. Chances are, if you are starting or trying something new that you're uncomfortable and unfamiliar with, self one tends to pop up more to talk to you, and self two tend to stay hidden.
Can you repeat that statement again?
If you are trying something new that you are unfamiliar with, uncomfortable with, self one tends to pop up more to talk to you rather than your self two, which talks about experiment, let's try something else.
Can I just say that is actually trained by a lot of us in our society? I would say that thought pattern is actually a pattern of in entrepreneurship, right? There was this article that was about how a parent rewarded kids for failing, and because they tried something that they otherwise were not confident in. And right away, right, these kids was super into the idea of self-2 being present in space of discomfort.
Yeah.
And trying out something new. So this is where the training of a lot of societal expectations brings that out in us. So just to say that there is an automatic sequence trained into us, not because it's by nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it becomes habits lah. So it becomes a unhelpful habit if we get reinforced by the reward, right? Because we think that makes us perform better, and then eventually it becomes some sort of interference. So I mean, to give a bit of context, is a bit like you notice some things trigger one person but doesn't trigger the other, right? So like my own personal interference that has happened for a long time is dealing with higher authority lah. I don't know, maybe I was beat up by my dad, right? So, sorry, just censored that. From young, so
by the way, anti-authoritarian is whenever you, it's a trait of whenever your authority when you're young espouses a value but does not live up to it.
Yeah.
Say that again. Say that again.
Say that again. Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever an authority figure espouses a value but they do not live up to it,
what happens?
So a parent goes, you must always be honest, and next moment lies. And these are creating anti-authoritarian behaviors in kids in the future. So what happens is that they might espouse a value, but then they don't uphold it themselves. So they don't do it by example.
Right. It's the do what I say, not what I do kind of a parenting.
And it's an active rebellious behavior by the parents to do so, the authority figures to do so, that causes anti-authoritarian behaviors in children.
Yeah, and then the effect of it is this, right? The effect of it is, to me, I will have a lot of thinking around whether I should even engage that person. So I get very self-conscious about it because of my maybe upbringing and things that impacted me. But for someone like maybe Alex or Ethan, if it doesn't affect you, you just reach out to that person as if it's just another person. Right, so there's no interference in that sense.
I got an interference recently that I managed to get past after I went through 2 rounds of therapy, 3 rounds of discussion with other people, to be able to talk to a person that triggers the hell out of me. So I completely understand what you mean, because it requires an immense amount of mindfulness, an immense amount of focus, and therefore bandwidth that's needed to refocus into this space to deal with somebody that triggers you, because then you have the bandwidth to handle the information of that trigger. That for you is authority, for me it's a type of authority behavior as well, that would then trigger us, that we have to actively manage in order for us not to want to avoid or explode or do certain things that would be harmful. Is that a good way of describing it?
I'm also thinking of when we talk about authority figures, again, Dr. Henry Cloud, right, was talking about the process of adulting, whereby we reach adult, but we still have a one up, one down kind of approach. Kind of haven't grown up, right? So we actually need to reach a stage whereby we end up even seeing authority figures as adult to adult kind of a relationship, rather than a one up and one down kind of a relationship.
But the behaviors by those people will still be the parenting behaviors. So that's also one of the major things. Because if I start telling you, Alex, you're wrong on that. You should be thinking this way. You shouldn't be saying that. You should look at this. You should. That's a parenting behavior that even if I want to try to look at you as an adult, I will feel triggered, because it's behaving as if you're trying to parent the other person.
Yeah. So that is your response to the person who's having parenting behavior to us, right? That look, the person might trigger, and then we either end up with a one down kind of a position because of the way the person talks to us, or we can, do I think in transactional analysis is adult to adult, right? So you parent to child kind of talking, but you can bring it back to adult.
As much as we would love to, there are plenty of people who are not capable of doing so. So it depends on what kind of outcomes you're looking for. I would say that I love what Henry Cloud says. I'm just saying that practically, it is hard to re-achieve the idea of externally having an adult to adult conversation as much as I can speak as an adult to another person. Does that make sense?
If I were to rephrase it, basically it just means practically it can be very hard to do.
Yes, it's very hard to achieve.
Depends on the individual also.
Yes.
Yeah, they may not be willing to let go of this parental aspect view that they want you to have.
Yeah, and I mean, is what Faith pointed out, right? I mean, and whether the willingness to let go, right? That is the, that's the key, right? And we cannot let go, then it become part of the thing that shapes us. So I mean, going back to the self-consciousness, self versus ego versus self one versus self two, which I put that way is I would just say like kids, right? I got two kids who sometimes I find that when I'm frustrated at them, right, I hold more anger than they hold anger at me. To them, is the next 5 seconds they'll just forget about it. Right, and you just realize, hey, how come they went back to play toys? And maybe some part of you is, you still got that shadow self that remains, which needs more work. And I like what Ethan and Alex say, there's some helpful ways out there that could help us to process that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about pressure. Okay, so this is an interesting concept that most people think that with more pressure, we tend to perform better. But pressure, but most people don't know is why do we need pressure? Pressure makes us focus, right? But you think about it, your natural state of going about a day is like, oh, you're just doing that particular proposal. Suddenly you have a thought around what happened yesterday. Suddenly you have a thought around what happens with your girlfriend or boyfriend. Suddenly you have a thought around happens, oh, I just watched that news. Until suddenly you see the timeline reach nearing, then the pressure comes, and then you get really focused on what you need to do. But what happens is when you get really focused and really narrow, sometimes you lose sight of, I would say, innovation, new ideas and new thoughts that can come. Basically, your headspace is filled with all the pressure that sometimes you don't have any headspace to fill with other new insights that can come about. So it was very interesting. So I watched this 2016 one of the Olympics around men's synchronized swimming, right? So they twist and turn. So the top 3 teams were the China and the US and the British. And then the China team, I never heard about the interview, but then on the US team, when the interviewer asked like, oh, what did you do to manage all this pressure? And then the US team say, oh, we did the meditation, we did the visualization, we did this imagery, and that helps us to take off that load, and then we feel better about it, right? And then, okay, that's great. And then the interviewer went to ask the British team, okay, so how do you manage all this pressure? Then the British team just looked at him, what pressure? They say like, oh, it is the Olympic stage. Didn't you feel that this is a very important moment? And the British team say that, no, there's no such thing as pressure. We just did what we did during our training, and we did just the same practice round that we did. Then the interviewer get a bit awkward. Shouldn't you feel pressure? So the interviewer get awkward, right? So,
right.
Of course, then...
And then the interviewer was under pressure.
Yeah, then the interviewer was under pressure. So, and one of the things that came through was whether or not pressure is made up, right, in a way. And if we think more about it, then we need to find a lot of ways to cope with, right? So, of course, during that result, the US team got the silver and the British team get bronze. But I tend to think that it's just that the US team just got more capability.
I think one of the major things about this is that that's when, okay, people think that performance now, i.e. like my current performance, the fact that it's by pressure is a great thing. Therefore, I like more pressure on me. So I think Melissa was talking about positive pressure. And then we also talk about there's this chart that talks about the healthy amount of pressure and then the not so healthy amount of pressure.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to recognize that when we talk about pressure in this space, Jeffeth, I think one of the major things about this is that when you're having fun, do you feel pressure?
No, you don't feel pressure because it naturally occurs to you as fun.
Yes, but here comes the thing. You do still feel the pressure in terms of the objective definition of pressure, which is there is a stress, there is a wish to achieve a certain goal. There is this kind of elements, right? Like if I play Dota or something like this, right? I'm still pressured to try to achieve a thing, because if not, why am I playing? Like there's a reason why people like betting for watching soccer or whatever, because it gives a certain amount of pressure. There is a pleasurable pressure, and what I think you just referred to was the kind of the negative pressure that once you get past it, you start losing ability to perform.
Yeah. So I would say that if, let's say, the pressure initially reminds you that, oh, I need to get onto this task now because I need to work on it. And then naturally you focus and being fully engaged on the task, right? That's how naturally people recover from the initial pressure. They get the initial thrill and then they focus on the task. Now, the negative side of that is when you get overly focused on the pressure, as if it becomes a thing that starts to impede you. Then you're not focusing on the task anymore.
Beautiful. So when you become more focused on the pressure itself than the actual thing itself.
Yes.
Yeah. So it comes back down to where your attention is, right? So if we come back to all the way in the beginning when you asked about the 2 reflection questions.
Yep.
Where performance comes when people are focused on the task, and then they perform poorly when they become more focused on themselves or the pressure of the situation.
Yes. And that also relates to a point called the flow state, right? And 10 flow state is who's that guy? I can never pronounce his name.
It's
Hali Sijak Mihai or something like that.
Yeah, I can't pronounce the guy's name also.
Wait, let me double check.
Yeah, so the flow theory, right? You're talking about.
Yeah. So basically, it's just a description of what people feel, right? When they are in a state of full engagement, they are in a state of flow. And when you're in a state of flow, you tend not to be focusing on your self-consciousness. You tend not to be self-conscious and having a self-doubt.
Okay. And I think the flow theory also talks about matching a person's capability with the complexity of the task. So in flow theory, when the task is very complicated, but the person doesn't have the capability, that's when a person gets overwhelmed, right? When the task is very simple, right, compared to the person's capability, then the person gets bored. So flow theory talks about the engagement, where a person gets in flow, is when there's a match between complexity and capability.
I would even like there's a further research that went into this, and when it's just above your capabilities is even better because you learn from it and it becomes fun. So it's not even about the it matches, it's about the fact that it has to be just above. So increasing difficulty.
Right?
Yes.
Challenge.
Yes. Then there's greater engagement.
Yeah. And I would say, let's say, like even Alex, what you pointed out, right? If let's say I was feeling overwhelmed at that moment, you can either gravitate both ways. Right? One is suddenly you scale down the expectation on yourself. Then you just focus on what you can do at that moment. Then you might hop back into flow again. But if let's say your attention suddenly pay attention to, I'm a lousy person, I can never seem to do good stuff, I'm not good enough, that's where you start to feel all the negative pressure building up again. And the self-consciousness.
I'm just gonna state over here, negative self-talk is not bad within itself. And I'm saying this on the level of because I know plenty of people who judge themselves for having negative self-talk after hearing something like this. So what happens is that if you judge yourself for having negative self-talk, you will have negative self-talk about your negative self-talk, and then it will cycle. Right.
Yeah,
so there's
so that eventually, like what Ethan pointed out, that's actually just self-conscious because now you got thoughts around thoughts, right? So you loop it, but actually it's just feeling more and more pressure around that.
Yeah, this is different from self-awareness, where I'm recognizing that I'm doing negative self-talk, I'm observing it, and then letting it go.
Yes. And I must say, one other things that when I see how people manage it, right, is they recognize that these thoughts will come. Negative self-talk happen as part of a natural process. That means you cannot fully eradicate it. But the question is, when you recognize it, do you give it so much importance that it stays in your mind to ruminate that, having that ruminating thoughts around it, which essentially is what Ethan said, thoughts around that thoughts.
And cycles.
Yeah, some people would say like, oh, I already done this, but now I think about whether I did it. Then I think about whether I think about I did it. Then you get into that kind of loop yourself.
Yeah. And I think one of the things about it, like what Ethan said, is the recognition of it, and also, I guess, having a strategy of knowing what hell to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, if we go back to our EFT session, right, then someone who has negative self-talk could start doing EFT things, or someone with NLP might start doing swish or anchoring, or or some people do meditation, or different ways, right? But they need to first recognize that there's self-talk, it will happen, be aware of it, and then have a strategy of dealing with it.
So I think I want to round back over to Jeffrey's concept about the interference. I think so that we can go back into this. So impact of state management, if I'm reading this correctly, because we haven't really exactly reached there yet. But if I will go back to pressure and state management, it's really about state of being, right? Is that what you're going for?
Slightly different. I'll explain a bit. So I put that the impact of stage management because I think people tend to think that I need to be in the perfect state before I can do something. And they spend too much time trying to meditate till they get perfect before they think they can perform. But there's a lot of studies that show that, I mean, there's a story about two golfers, right? So one golfer wakes up in the morning, had a great breakfast, woke up on the right side of the bed, feeling great about it. Went down to the field and sort of the golf field, make the perfect swing, hit a perfect score. Great. There was another golfer, woke up on the wrong side of the bed, stepped over his dog poop, feel shitty about it, still head out to the golf pitch, still hit the perfect swing, and still hit the perfect score. Now, the thing is, does both of them perform well? Yeah. It's just that the other one just feels shitty about it. So not to say that state management does not have any relationship, but I think it is a bit overly exaggerated, whereby you need to be in some kind of perfect state before you can start doing something.
That's interesting, right? Like, actually, I want to hold you there only because of the fact that maybe the second guy, right? Like, this is where I love this. There is always this thing where state is completely out of your hands. That's actually not true. So my favorite statement from this was, there was this young budding artist. They were trying to ask this experienced artist, how do you make a career out of being an author? Because he's an author and an artist and everything. He said, well, other people are inspired right when they're inspired. I'm inspired every morning at 9 a.m. This is what we term as proper state management, in the sense of, as long as I put myself into the right state, I will actively manage my state. I mean, this is where the difference is, right? Like, there are a lot of people who are always about the state is a result of the environment versus I create the state. And yeah, so this is where I would concur and at the same time add on, right? Like, to say that there is a lot of the management of your own state that comes into this picture, where you manage it in a way that puts you in the right state to hit the perfect swing or to do the same things as before, even if you had a bad day.
Yeah.
Just to add on. Yeah.
And actually, I wonder, right, for the second person who had the bad day, all the negative talk, and still managed to perform, whether he would have performed better if he was in a better state. So then that might also come back to the other side of the equation, right? The potential. Maybe the person still had interference, but he had greater potential, and therefore he could still swing. So
I mean, it may or may not, right? So it's the same thing as, have you ever been in a great mood, but you still perform poorly?
Plenty of time.
Maybe because plenty of time, right? So it's not that you feel good means you can perform well. Is you just feel better about it, right? So
there's this wonderful thing in music. The more you try to recreate what you've done before, the less you'll be able to do anything good. right? So in music, right, when we do live performance, we have to be present in a moment and just adjust to the environment. And this is where I think when Alex said that, I hear you, Jeffers, but I'm just going to add on to that in that sense of, especially as a stage performer and doing jazz music and Cuban music the way I do, I have no choice but to adjust to the bloody environment I'm in, because I might not be able to hear the drums. I might not be able to hear the keyboard. I might not be able to hear the singer, but I still have to play. Yes, I could play better if everything worked out perfectly, but in this current context, at this current time, can I bring out the best in me? Can I bring out the best of what I can have? And I think this is really the key part, if I'm not wrong about Jeffers' conversation here today as well. It's about the best of what you can do, rather than an objective yardstick of what can be better at another time. So in the sense of when you are asking the question, my first question is, does it matter?
Yeah.
Because he had a bad day regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Jeffers, your point was basically the whole point of state management has been overplayed in terms of performance.
Yes, I think it has been overplayed, and it's a bit, I meant to add on, it's like what Ethan said, being present, and then because if let's say you try to recreate the past, you are creating something in your head that you are trying to fulfill, which sort of add pressure, right? If you think about it, it adds pressure to yourself, which it comes back to the second point, whether you're focusing on the pressure or are you focusing on the performance and playing it.
Hey, Jeffers, just doing a quick time check. We have about 10 minutes left. Do you have a lot more to cover?
No, this is my last slide.
Okay.
Oh, perfect. Wow.
Perfect timing.
I time it very well.
Awesome. Perfect
With
timing.
all the interferences by me and Alex and everybody else.
Yeah, I've catered that too.
Well planned.
You predicted the interference to do the state management.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Alex, I think what would be helpful is to hear from maybe the rest what landed for them, what came up for them, things like that. You want to lead that?
Sure. So maybe we can go back to just the gallery view. You can stop sharing. Okay, awesome. So guys, I think Jeffers has really taken us through quite a bit, and all of us have gone through quite a bit of discussion, all the way from talents, what is potential, right? What influences potential, internal, external, and things like that. So what we can do is let's just go around and everyone can share what impacted you the most in today's discussion, right? As we start talking about bringing more out of you. So maybe I'll start right now. So for me,
I share the mirror meanwhile?
You want to do summary first or after?
I think so that people's memories are a little bit jot.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can keep going. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll share first, then you can do the summary, and then we'll go to the rest. I think for me, one of the things that landed the most for me was about the focus, right? So am I focused more on the task, or have I become very kind of self-absorbed, self-conscious that actually impacts the way that I do things? So when it's less of me and more of the task, I'm going to say more of God actually, but definitely focus other than myself that brings that performance for me, right? So less self-consciousness, less of me, and that's what landed for me. Okay, so Ethan, over to you to do quick recap of everything we've talked about, and then we'll go around to the rest and see what landed for them.
Okay, so I think so it's a quick one so that we can at least have some memories of the whole series of things that happened. So let's go back to the start where the outer game versus inner game, right? It's about outer game is performance related to capacity and knowledge versus the inner game, which is about performance is related back to potential minus interference. And potential is related back to capabilities and capacity and strengths and talents and bandwidth. And a lot of these other areas in which it's down to practice and actions that you have taken, right? And when we talk about this is that when we bring back the strength finder, strength is performance, and the whole nature versus nurture thing where we talk about talents because it's a struggle, right, for us to talk about this. And this is where we went into the details of how it kind of, like when we talk about this is that talent might be a result, which is what I propose this time, is of your interferences, right? Or the lack thereof. So anything you don't have talent in is because you probably have interference in. And interference relates back to your self-doubt, your shadows, your self-consciousness where you have negative self-talk. It's really born from the ego versus the inner self, where when you're in a space of discomfort due to the upbringing or whatever you've been through, you believe that your ego, your self-judgment, your expectations of yourself will come and interfere with your ability to stay present to perform. And when we talk about this, it's always back down to the pressure that you create can be internal, absolutely internal. I mean, you are Olympics. The British team might not have felt any pressure because they probably enjoyed the pressure and didn't think of it as pressure, whereas the American team talked about managing the state, meditating, being in the right state, right? So this is where we are talking about how it's very subjective, and it really shows even if the performance might not be exactly showcased as like, oh, because you're more at peace, therefore you're able to perform better. But the truth here is, when we talk about the best of yourself, it's about you. It's not about the exact performance that you're going for. It is absolutely about how to bring out the best or more out of yourself. And that's my summary first. And then we can go back to everybody to go through the content.
Yeah, so Ethan, while you're at it, you share what landed for you.
Oh, for me, it's always going back down to, yeah, this is exactly what I've been working on for all my life. It's just over and over again. Like, it just reinforces that everybody's talented. Okay, so like, your talents is where you're not being interfered. You're not being negated by something else. So if I lack talent in some area, it's probably because I have some negative self-talk or I have some certain negative beliefs of myself, right? I used to write really badly and I became a person who's actually featured on writing. I thought I was bad at public speaking. I became a TEDx speaker, right? Like, it's all these different things that once you negate it and you deal with the negative versions of the kind of different shadow selves, it is possible to change who you are and develop yourself. And today is just a reinforcement of that over and over again.
Awesome. Thanks. Actually, I could have talked a little bit about how your talent teams could also show up as interference, but maybe next session. Okay, so thanks, Ethan. You can close the screen share and can go back to the gallery. Okay, so let's go around. Ken, what landed for you? Ken, are you there?
Ken is replying somebody for a short while. Can we move to somebody here first and then we'll come back?
Okay, sure. Faith, what landed for you?
It's about the fact that pressure is subjective. It can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, depending on how the person chooses to perceive it and react or proactive towards it. Yeah, so it's not necessarily an interference. It's a form of interpretation that can be used to advantage. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Faith. Sijin, how about you?
You're talking to me, right?
Yeah.
So my biggest takeaway is that because most of the time when we talk about bringing out the best in us, then we talk about the positive stuff lah, like your capability, your talents, the bandwidth. But it's not often that we talk about the negative side lah, the hindrance side lah, on the negative self-talk, pressure, and the impact of state management. So I think that was my biggest takeaway, the negative part. Yeah.
Addressing the negative part. Okay, let's go back to Ken. Are you back? Ken, we can't hear you somehow.
Yep, I'm back. So I think the very first thing that came to me was that actually before you think about whether you can or cannot do, why not just discard the state and try it out? Like, put the state out the window. You don't know how it's going to turn out. You just try it out and see how much you enjoy it. And possibly, you try the first time, you realize that you actually have a potential in it, or you actually enjoy it. I think that's about it.
Okay, awesome. And the first thing that jumped out at me was your activator. That's what activator tends to say, right? And I have this thing about activators. I call them ready, fire, aim. So
yeah, because I'm also the kind that just believe that because of my all my trade competitions, so I just believe that I can do it lah. So I can believe I can do it better also lah. So just do lah.
Right. Awesome. Okay.
I'll just interpret the version of what I say is, i.e., remove all expectations and just whack. That's what Ken means.
Yeah, and whack because he believes it can be done, that he will be first. And he knows exactly what to do, and everybody should follow him. So
Yeah, that's absolutely his command. And then the number of times I have to correct him, never mind.
okay, we will come back to strengths with Ken the next round. Joanna, what about you? Your what landed for you?
I think for me it's really quite similar to what you mentioned, Alex, where it's really about where the thoughts are. Is it about the task or the pressure, or about yourself and the pressure that you're feeling?
So where we shift attention to, right, plays a really, really big part. Melissa, how about you?
For me, I think my takeaway is in regard to what the illustration y'all gave on the Olympic swimmers. So I think like nothing is ever good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So I would like to, I mean, it's easier said than done, but I guess like in the face of stress, I'll have to have that mindset, like to remove myself from that situation, and then like to look at things objectively as opposed to I think it's all in the mind. So like thinking, and like what y'all said, I mean, it's about perceiving it to be stress, and then so if I can just remove myself from that stressful situation and then look at things objectively and then weigh the options, then I think I think that might work in my favor. That's my takeaway.
Thank you, Melissa. And last but not least, Lai Feng.
I missed quite a bit of it, so but I managed to catch the part about the where you put your focus on. I think that impact me the most. But I think we do tend to focus more on the pressure part of things, because whether you work on a task because there is a pressure on you, and it can work to your advantage, because it's like it's like deadlines, and you force yourself to focus, and I think that can turn it to be advantageous. So I think sometimes it's use maybe steer something that is negative to be positive, and you can manage it better. So I don't know, I'm still thinking about processing about this.
Okay, thank you. So actually we talk a lot about pressure, right? And like what Faith, it can turn out for better or for worse, depending a lot on how we respond to it. And I would like to add on to that also, a lot of it goes back down to our self-talk. We started that at the start of the session. So what do we tell ourselves when we start to face pressure? Do we go like, oh no, or do we have something else that's more positive that gets us to focus on the task? And that makes all the difference, right?
And
so,
I think just to...
I would love to hear Jeffers actually take on everything as he's continuing from here. So I would like to hand it over to Jeffers as he's adding on his things and your thoughts about today's sessions.
Yeah.
Okay, my thoughts. So I just want to respond to some of the reflections that you all shared, and I think in a way, I just want to point out that your thoughts are fleeting, right? So they come and go, and it happened very quickly. Just the moment you think about it, maybe a timeline may just pop up in your head to talk about the next work that you have to do. So I think like what Lai Feng mentioned, right? Sometimes like, once I feel the pressure, all my attention and focus go on focusing on what task needs to be done. Now, in that sense, it's great, right? Because I try to put all my effort into focusing on what needs to be done rather than on myself. The trouble is when the microscope starts pointing back to yourself, that's where you are not really present anymore, because you're looking at yourselves, you can't see what's ahead of you. So that's what I like what Ethan shared about being, actually in a way, is being available to the present moment. And and what Melissa said, like get out of the way of yourself, so you can be able to be present to what's happening in front of you. So my thoughts around is this is one of the first few topics that I really recently talked about. But I'm glad that some of these things are landing well for people. So I personally take away that there's some concepts that can be explored further. So I personally feel very excited. So that's how I will wrap up. Thanks.
And Ethan has added, right, the next session, let's do the topic of identifying the interference, right? So we've got our next topic settled. So we'll end for today and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night. Good week. Bye.
Bye, Faith.